All right, so welcome to the Black Impact Podcast, spilling information that's pertinent to the Black Americans living here. So today we got a few topics to discuss. Starting off with Eric Mays, just throwing out there rest in peace
Absolutely. Absolutely.
to a legend in his community, somebody that worked to bring his community resources despite the lack of opportunities there throughout the water crisis. And so just wanted to throw that out there. Shout out to him and condolences to his family, friends, and community that he impacted. So
Yeah, honestly. He's
getting
he's the blueprint of what the Black Impact want to be. My Black Impact, I mean, he's just kind of how we want to do with our show, free speech, saying how you need to say it and saying it in a way that everybody can understand.
definitely providing that information to the community and being a resource for honest, open communication. So
I also want to shout out one more guy. His name was Aaron Bushnell. He's a 25-year-old soldier. Yeah, set himself on fire outside the Israel embassy in Washington. He's protesting the war in Gaza, and his literal last words was "Free Palestine, man." So shout out Aaron Bushton, R.I.P. man. Uh, Hopefully he didn't die for nothing, dude. Okay.
definitely agree with that. It was a noble act. And so of course, shout out to our service members, but also him specifically for dying for what he believed in and making a stance on what he believed in. So jumping into our first topic here, kind of delves into respectability politics, but also understanding that we as Black people are segregated not only by our skin color, but how we move and act in the world. So if you don't know already, there was a Texas student by the name of Daryl George. He is a senior in high school. And so about 45 minutes outside of Houston, Texas, in Anahuac, which is East Texas for the y'all that don't know. He has not been attending regular classes since school began in August due to his dreadlocks. And so the school has a rule against having for males that have hair below their earlobes. And so, of course, with his dreadlocks being longer, he thought that this was protected by the Crown Act, but it doesn't seem that way as a judge just ruled that the school was in their right to suspend him because the Crown Act doesn't cover length of hair. It only covers texture and different types of hairstyles, mostly pertaining to Black and brown people. So, what's your thoughts on that?
It's just sick when they try to make policies and things seem like it impacts everybody, but you just know certain ones are just aimed at Black people, yo. Like, come on, yo. Black like locks, I think right now, especially for the culture right now, is the new thing. Everybody trying to get them, everybody doing them. Or if you don't have locks, your hair is long, you got a fro, or you feel me? Everybody still got the waves. Shout out to the niggas with the waves and everything, but locks, long hair is just in style right now. And so when you're doing something like this, you're attacking Black people. I don't care what you try to justify and say, you're attacking Black people. And I was in the comments under a post. I mentioned this incident you had mentioned, and I'm pretty sure they said like a white guy in the school had locks or something, and like he did not face any type of punishment, no nothing, no suspension, no anything. So it's just real interesting to me right now.
That was my next thing because I do know that a lot of other races they wear their hair below their earlobes, and so I wanted to know how this was distributed across students of different ethnicities. But from what I do know about that area of Texas in particular, that area has had a lot of racial issues, stemming back even through the area there we or Reconstruction
Okay.
era.
Yeah, yeah,
So there are still towns such as Vidor, which is about an hour away, that actively have planned meetings in that area. And so I will say I definitely think that it is racially motivated because of course, dreads being seen. And this kind of goes back to the whole respectability politics, where there's dreads are seen as unprofessional, quote unquote, by many white people or other people And so I definitely think that that played a role into it, and I would love to see kind of how this plays out amongst students of all races that have longer hair. But I think that that is something that needs to be discussed going further is how to improve the Crown Act to allow more expression or freedom of expression without having the worries and the fears of being retaliated against through the legal system or through the schooling system in this case.
No, I definitely agree. I definitely agree. That was well said. Mine isn't really a direct effect to the black community right now, but it can be in the future. So if you don't know, there's been a lot of farmers protests going on around the world, and France has had one recently, and they were blocking major city highways with tractors and livestock, and people on the front lines just protesting about not being paid enough, and then they were also protesting that the EU about the EU tax regulations on them. The EU is trying to meet certain climate change emission goals right now, and so the farmers are taking a big hit due to that. An example of one of those is the farmer has to keep 4% of their farmland fallow to meet tax regulations. And fallow means basically that they can't grow food or till or do anything to that piece of land for, I think, for like at least a food cycle or two. And and that's basically controlling a surplus of food from happening. Um, and then there's also unfair food competition in France, which is like another reason that the farmers are protesting because Ukraine is providing France with cheaper sugar, meat, and grain right now, which is some of the bigger uh, dollar food items that the France produces, as France is the EU's top producer in food. So the to see farmers poor and then poor to the extent that they're staging these type of protests is just wild to me. And so I believe there's also farmer protests going on in Belgium, Germany, Romania, and India. And I don't think the US isn't far behind because they're trying to switch to synthetic meat. I don't know if you've seen that, Bryson. Have you seen any little stories about that?
Definitely have seen some, especially with the Impossible meat, and some of the other meat alternatives. I've definitely seen that.
Yeah, and so I'm feeling like they're trying to phase away from actual farming, which is insane to say, but it's like you're seeing these other countries tax their farmers so much money just for producing the thing that we need to live, which is food, and it doesn't make sense to me. It really doesn't.
I
And so,
definitely oh,
oh
my
no,
bad.
keep going. No, keep going.
I definitely think that that is something that will trickle down, especially from the economic side of things. We just came out of record inflation here in the U.S., specifically within the food sector,
Mhm.
and so of course that impacts a lot of low income families. And so I definitely think that we will see something similar in the U.S. It looks like, in addition to the countries that you mentioned, Spain is another country,
Ooh,
Spain and Poland as well, that are having issues with protests. And so, of course, in Europe, they are very heavily taxed. And so, here in the US,
yeah,
at least, we do give subsidies to our farmers, which is a good
yeah,
thing to some extent, because we're a population of 330 million people. And so I think farmers or farms in general are one of those career paths that don't get enough love, if you will, teachers, nurses, etc. And so I
uh,
think that the US has done a decent job in subsidizing some of those costs for farmers, but I can definitely see it spilling over, as we've seen in other countries, and causing some rifts here, which would cause inflation to go higher in an election year. So I think that at least the Biden administration needs to be doing everything that they can to prevent that from happening.
facts. Did you I thought the US was paying its farmers not to farm as well, like certain programs. I don't know if it was like tax breaks out of it or anything like that, but I'm gonna have to do more research in it. You feel me? Before I
Mhm.
just jump. But like the problem I just see with this happening, and if it's happening on a global scale, that farmers are being taxed harder just to meet emissions is really like a self-sufficiency thing. It's like they don't want people to be able to take care of themselves and then people to have natural food. And the reason that they're telling farmers to keep land fallow is for food surplus. Like, what does that mean?
Mhm.
It can't, like, there can't be too much food, I feel like, in the sense that we have so many people that's just hungry and homeless right now. You could solve world hunger just by giving them the surplus of food that every farmer would be producing. So I don't know. I'm not a conspiracy theorist and I'm not one of those, you feel me, super out there, but dots connect, man. And between the synthetic food and the fake fruits, it's just like they don't want you to have an actual like healthy lifestyle anymore. It feels like
I definitely agree with that because the issue that we're not seeing is even if, which I will say, cows are one of the biggest producers of global warming because they release methane gas. And so,
for sure.
from that aspect, I understand that. But from another aspect, we're just replacing those cows with soy. A lot of the vegan, vegetarian alternatives for meat include soy, which propose like that causes a lot of issues, and we don't know how that'll turn out long term for the human body. But then
Yeah,
also, it still doesn't equate to not allowing farmers to farm because we will need increased amount of soy to accommodate for those vegan and vegetarian alternatives. And so that is something that is pretty interesting from that perspective. And I think that I will say, at least with France, they protest for everything. And so
facts.
um,
Facts.
I think that it's not going to be the greatest for Emmanuel Macron just because of
Mm,
how close the last election was and how right wing Europe is becoming. And so I think that he really needs to, or at least his administration needs to strategize a better plan to kind of cope with these protests and appease these protesters, specifically the farmers. Because one, of course, the inflation aspect, if you aren't farming your own food, you're having to import from other countries, which raises the cost to consumers. And of course, then you already have that kind of center right shift in Europe. And so if he wants to stay in office, I think that this is something that he's going to have to jump on immediately.
I think the fix he needs to do is to tax those corporations. That is, let they're the ones making the biggest carbon footprint, putting out the most emissions and doing all these things, but they're not seeing much of the tax. I feel like when you tax your citizens, that you're going to get immediate pushback. Like you said, the French protest everything. I'm not saying the US should model anything behind them, but hey, yo, you can look at their playbook and fuck with them. You feel me? I don't know. It's just crazy.
I definitely agree. So just kind of doing a quick little search, it looks like that the tax bracket in France goes from 0 to 45% with an extra 3% for earners over 250,000 euros. And so that's a lot, especially I'm not sure off top of head how much farmers make, especially in Europe, but
So
depending on that tax rate, that could really crush people, especially smaller farmers that aren't producing for these mega corporations. So I think, like you
exactly.
said, it really goes back to continuing to tax those corporations. But that also creates a balancing act of how do you tax the corporations more without pushing them to a country like
Move out of your country.
Luxembourg. Yeah, and so
Yeah, exactly.
that's the issue with that. Of course, you have tax havens like Switzerland, Luxembourg that border France, and so you don't want to push them
Mhm.
away to those countries and lose jobs, but you also want to make sure that you have enough tax revenue to accommodate. Of course, they have very generous social programs in France, so it's a real balancing act there.
Absolutely. Nah, you're good with that finance stuff too, bro. I ain't gonna lie. I ain't, you feel me? Numbers not my thing. I see how people move. I can watch things, but with somebody that can follow the numbers, that's it's tough. It's tough.
All right. So for this next topic, I want to get your thoughts on the South Carolina primary. It looks like Donald Trump won just over 60% of the primary votes, with Nikki Haley coming in at 40%. And so, of course, that is Nikki Haley's home state. And
No
so
cap.
I think that's really telling of the election, and I don't think that she's going to be in the race much longer. Especially because if you can't win your home state, that's usually telling for the national opinion of your campaign. So I want to get your thoughts on this as a poli sci major.
Nah, facts. So, like you said, not winning your home state, man. That's a big blow. And I think we'll see like right before the Republican primaries, like a real big push, like a real hard push by both sides for Nikki Haley. The way that the media pushed Donald Trump, the way that politicians pushed Donald Trump, if you're not in the GOP, they hate that man. They do not want that man in office at all. And so when he goes and beats your number one, you feel me, prospect in her home state, insanity, yo. Like, and I'm not a I'm not gonna say I know a lot about Nikki Haley, but she said she's like Native American or something. And then I keep seeing things about her being like Asian American and all these other things, and I'm just trying to see it, man. I'm
Yeah.
not gonna lie.
So it's actually an interesting story about Nikki Haley. And she's actually been caught up in this multiple times, and I think it kind of speaks to the Republican Party in itself, and
But
especially voters in the South. So Nikki Haley is originally Indian American. Both of her parents are Indian, if I'm correct, and her original name was Nimrata. And so she goes by Nikki, of course, which it kind of goes back to respectability politics and denying heritage to appease a certain demographic. And so, of course, going from Nimrata to Nikki Haley um, is something that has been called out by Vivek.
yeah, Ramaswamy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So he called that out, also being Indian American, saying that he didn't particularly like how she handled that. And so of course she came in her race saying that racism is not a big part of American culture. But we see that if going back a few years, that she mentions being bullied every day growing up, where she was being the only Indian American in her school. And then of course we see her changing her name. And so I don't think that her authenticity can be matched to Donald Trump because, like him, hate him, Donald Trump is very authentically himself, whether that's a good thing or a bad
agreed.
thing. And I
Agreed.
think that that's a lot, or that's something that a lot of people resonate with. He's not PC. He says what's on his mind. And so I
But
think that's something that a lot of people really like about Donald Trump. And so going back to her specifically, I think that she would have had a great chance if she wasn't running against Donald Trump. So
exactly.
she has an accounting background, and I will say, I disagree with a lot of her policies, but from the perspective of especially her abortion policy and then also her budgetary policy or her monetary policy rather, she has done a decent job of at least getting the state from or state of South Carolina from a deficit to making it a place that many companies choose to do business. So I know that there's a lot of car manufacturers that have been
Mm,
moving their operations back to the US, and South Carolina, of course, is one of those states. And then, of course, during the pandemic, a lot of South Carolina actually gained quite a bit of financial traction just due to one, its proximity to Charlotte and Atlanta, which are their own hub
yeah,
in their
yeah,
own right. But then a lot of people moved to cities like Charleston and Columbia during that time as well because it is cheaper than some of the northeastern cities. And so I will say that having a background in accounting is something that I do like to see in a politician because she understands how to balance a budget. And that's been kind of one of the main things that she has continually said in the debates. And so I think that is promising for the US. But I just don't think that she stands a chance compared to Donald Trump. Of course, he's very well liked. And so I think
but
that this is going to be a losing race for her. And then in addition to that, I don't think that the Republican Party is ready to see a woman front runner.
yeah,
So that's the unfortunate part about it. And so of course, I think that there are qualified women to run the United States, but I just don't think that the Republican base is ready to see that just yet.
Nah, I definitely agree with that. And yeah, like the biggest story here is definitely Donald Trump being hurt at home. I agree that having a good financial background is would be great for the country, but like she's also a very big proponent for war, and I don't think she minds these wars that the US are looking at right now. When you have a lot of anti-war sentiment and Trump saying things like he won't go to war and doing this stuff. And I'm not a pro-Trump guy. You feel me? This election coming up, I don't think either option is good. From what it's looking like currently between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Um, I just let everybody know, don't be afraid to look into third parties. I know they never win, but this year I think RFK has a real decent chance, especially if he can get in front of some of them national elections and really speak.
Yeah, I think that like you hit it on the nail on the head. So for me, at least, third party candidates, it's really a tough race. I think that the best chance that a third party candidate had was in that 2016 election where you had the governor of New Mexico, I believe, and he was running for the Libertarian Party. And then, of course, Elizabeth Warren out of Massachusetts
Yeah.
for the Green Party. And so I think that people are very there. It's hit or miss. This election, there's really no good chances from the mainstream candidates. Of course, you've got Joe Biden on the Democrat side, which I think that we really need to be considering Kamala's propensity to be president, given his age, and kind of his
Yeah.
mental state, if you will. And so I think that that's something that Democrat voters need to be considering as well. Do you feel confident voting for essentially
To
what could be a Harris or Kamala Harris presidency? But then, of course, Donald Trump, we don't know how it's gonna play out within these next few months. Of course, he had the judgment in the Southern District of New York last week, but then of course all of the pending legal action, and then of course his record in office, and so that's one thing to consider. And I think that it's a no-win situation, really. There's no good candidates that I would truly want to vote for in this election. I think it's more so just about picking the lesser of two evils, if you will.
and see, and the craziest part is that was the argument the first time these two guys matched. They matched up, just the lesser of the two evils, and then we put our trust in Biden, and the boy does a shit show. It's insane.
I
I
will
continue.
I was gonna say, like, I will say, I think that Biden does get a lot of hate just
He does
because of the things that he has done, but there are things that I do appreciate. So especially like the I know he recently did an act to kind of cap some of the pharmaceutical prices, if you will. And so
mm,
that's something that I definitely agree with. Despite
facts.
what we're seeing in some of the tech and finance sectors, unemployment is at one of the lowest points in my lifetime, at least. And so I think that there is a bright side. So currently, at least from the NASDAQ, we're seeing some of the highest numbers that we've seen in quite a long time. And so there
Mm,
are some silver linings to the Biden administration, but I think his big thing that pissed off a lot of voters, which he didn't have as much control over as what people would like to say. But this definitely kind of upset me as someone with student loans, but he pushed that
facts.
there, and there was no chance that it was going to win. The Republicans were not going to let that pass, despite the amount of money that we're sending to Israel, especially. And so,
Multiple wars.
yeah,
Multiple wars.
wars. And so we're funding all of these other countries, but can't fund U.S. interest. And so, of course, that had to run through Congress, and the Republicans denied that. So I can't blame him too much for that. But I will say that that didn't resonate with a lot of Gen Z and millennial voters, especially that have burdens of student loans. So I think that it's really a toss up. I can't quite predict where it's gonna go. Um, and so that's what I have to say on that. I really don't know who's gonna win the 2024 election, because there's a strong chance that
Do do
Trump.
you think? My bad. Do you think if the Democrats decide to drop Biden and just run Kamala, do you think she has a chance to win?
I think that that would be a horrible plan, because I honestly
So
I can't think of anything, and maybe I'm just uninformed, but I really can't think of anything particular that Kamala has done to make me say I would vote for her.
yeah,
Um,
same,
so
same.
for me, I know her from increasing the rate of black men in San Francisco that were jailed. And so that's
Yeah,
when I first knew of her. And so I think that the best chance for the Democratic Party, and I think it's a bit too late to do that, considering that the primaries are already occurring in many states or in caucuses as well, is to just scrap both of them and find a candidate that would really resonate with voters. If you want to run a woman candidate, I think Gretchen Whitmer out of Michigan would be a great choice. I think that
mm,
there's quite a few other politicians that would be safe choices that people would vote for, but are much younger in age, and that people would resonate more with, if that makes sense.
yeah. I know a lot of people, especially when you ask them about Kamala, black people, the first thing they say is that she was locking up people in California. But and then what was the second half of that? Right, the last thing you had just said.
So I think that Gretchen Whitmer would be a great choice.
Oh,
I think we
yeah,
should just scrap the two candidates. We have Kamala and Biden. And I think Gretchen Whitmer, she's done a good job revitalizing her state. Of course, Detroit is on the rebound. She's been able to bring jobs back into the state, big employers such as Google coming to Ann Arbor. And so I
mhm,
think that she has the knowledge, especially with those kind of economically depressed areas such as the Rust Belt where she leads. I think that that would resonate with states in the Rust Belt that can go swing each way. Ohio, Pennsylvania, the western part of New
yeah,
York,
major swing
Indiana.
states.
And so I think that that would be a solid choice for a Democratic front runner, but I just don't see the Democrats pushing Biden or Kamala Harris to the side. So I think that,
Yeah.
that's a it's setting up the Democrats for a loss, and they've been doing this since 2016, running Hillary, despite most Democrats not even really wanting to vote for Hillary. And
In
so
the
I think
beginning,
that's a
yeah.
big major flaw within the Democratic Party.
Nah, for sure, for sure. Nah, I think you hit that on the head. I got to do my research into her. I got to look more into Michigan. Not gonna lie.
Definitely. So I just wanted to wrap it up here. Thank you guys for listening to the podcast. We'll probably be coming out with 2 episodes a month, and really just allowing some knowledge to be spilled from the Black perspective going forward. So
Facts.
thank you for listening to the Black
Uh,
Impacts, and we will catch you next time.